I want you to look at something. What you are about to see are 4 frames pulled from a camcorder recovered in the Pacific Northwest in 1994. The timestamp reads April 24th, 1993, 4:18 p.m. The camera was found inside a collapsed tent, roughly 8 miles off any maintained trail, deep in forested highland terrain near the Oregon-Washington border. The man who carried that camera into those mountains was never found. His name does not appear in any public missing persons database that I have been able to locate. What does survive is a handful of personal effects, a journal with approximately 2 weeks of entries, and these frames. I want you to look at them carefully before I explain what we are seeing. In the first frame, you see a grassy hillside. The terrain is rugged, volcanic rock formations breaking through the soil and cut into the base of a rocky outcrop are dark openings. Standing upright on 2 legs with broad shoulders and a thick torso, and the head is wrong. The head belongs to a canine. That is a Dogman, standing at the entrance to what I believe is a permanent den in broad daylight, completely unbothered by the presence of a camera less than 200 yards away. Not crouching, not fleeing, standing the way a person stands outside their own front door on a clear afternoon, relaxed, territorial, home. In the second frame pulled from the same recording, the camera has shifted. Now you can see the full scene. There are more of them, 4, possibly 5 Dogman walking together across the hillside near those cave entrances. They are upright. They are moving as a group, not scattered, not fleeing, not reacting to a threat. They are walking with the kind of calm, deliberate purpose you see in a group of people heading somewhere together. They look like they own that hillside, because they do. In these frames you can see the Dogmen clearly. They are massive, broad-chested, bipedal, wolf-headed, covered in dark grayish-brown fur that thickens across the shoulders and upper back. And here is the detail that changes everything about how I think about these creatures. They appear to be wearing something around their waists, crude coverings, hide or leather wraps, and at least one of them is carrying a long object, a staff, a spear, something fashioned and held with deliberate purpose. These Dogman are wearing clothing and carrying tools. This is not a blurry shape caught in the tree line at midnight. This is not a shadow on a game camera that could be a bear standing on its hind legs. This is a group of Dogmen walking upright in daylight, wearing coverings, carrying tools, entering and exiting cave dwellings. This is a tribe, and the man who filmed them walked deeper into their territory after capturing this footage and never came back. So before we continue, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, because this one genuinely kept me up at night, and I want to hear if anyone in the Pacific Northwest has ever encountered anything like what I'm about to describe. The story begins not with the footage but with the recovery. In the spring of 1994, a search and rescue team operating in a remote section of the Cascade Range found a campsite that did not match any known trail camp or designated wilderness area. The site was deep in backcountry, the kind of terrain that experienced hikers reach only after days of bushwhacking through dense forest and climbing steep volcanic ridges. The tent had collapsed, likely from weather exposure over the winter months. Gear was scattered around the site, but not in the chaotic way you typically see after an animal encounter. There were no claw marks on the fabric, no tooth punctures in the packs. The food stores were untouched, which is almost unheard of in bear country, where the smell of dried food can draw a black bear from over a mile away. Whatever happened at this campsite, it was not a standard predator encounter. What the team recovered told a story that the official report never fully addressed. They found a camcorder in a waterproof case, still functional despite months of exposure. They found a journal with entries spanning roughly 14 days. They found a backpack with supplies, some depleted but most still packed as if the man had planned to continue his trip for at least another week. And they found a pair of hiking boots approximately 200 yards from the tent, sitting neatly side by side in a small clearing, not thrown, not torn off by force, not half buried in mud the way discarded gear ends up after a struggle, placed there, deliberately set down by something with hands and the intention to leave them where they would be found. I want you to hold that detail in your mind because I will come back to it. I think those boots tell us more about what happened than any other single piece of evidence in this case. The man had been reported missing roughly 3 weeks before the campsite was discovered. He was an experienced solo hiker in his late 30s with years of backcountry travel under his belt. He was not a novice who wandered off a trail and got lost. His friends described him as obsessive about a subject he rarely discussed openly, telling only his closest circle that he intended to prove something that people refused to believe. He did not elaborate further. He told a friend he would be gone for approximately 3 weeks and left his vehicle at a remote trailhead. The vehicle was found first. The campsite came later. The official determination was death by exposure or misadventure. Case closed within months. The camcorder footage and journal contents were never released to the public and were reportedly filed with local law enforcement as personal effects of the deceased. No further investigation was conducted. I spent weeks tracking down details about this case, and I want to be transparent with you about what I am working from. I have not held the journal in my hands. I am working from second-hand accounts of the journal entries provided by sources I trust, and from the frames you have already seen. The sources are consistent in their descriptions of what those pages contained, and the frames speak for themselves. There is no ambiguity in what that camera recorded. Now I want to walk through what the journal reveals, because this is where the story shifts from a standard missing hiker case into something that I personally think is one of the most compelling Dogman accounts ever documented. The early entries are exactly what you would expect from an experienced outdoorsman on a planned wilderness trek. Trail conditions, weather observations, wildlife sightings, water source notes. The man wrote methodically. His sentences were short and direct. He documented distances covered, elevation changes, and compass bearings with the precision of someone who had spent years navigating backcountry terrain. This was not someone wandering aimlessly into the woods on a whim. He had a plan, he had a route, and he had a destination in mind. By day 3, the tone of the journal begins to change. He describes finding tracks near a creek bed at the base of a ridge. Not bear tracks, not cougar, not human. The prints were bipedal with visible claw impressions at the tips of the toes, pressed deep into soft ground. The stride length was longer than a tall man's walking gait, and the depth of the impression suggested significant body weight behind each step. He measured them. He sketched them in the margins of the journal with careful proportions and scale markings. According to the sources who have seen those sketches, the dimensions are consistent with Dogman track castings that have been documented across multiple states over the past several decades. He wrote on that 3rd day that he had found what he came for. That single line is the clearest statement of intent in the entire journal. This man went into those mountains looking for Dogman, and on day 3, he found the first physical confirmation that his research was correct. I have covered enough of these cases to know that finding tracks is usually the point where most people turn around. The physical evidence makes the idea real in a way that reading reports does not. When you are standing in the mud looking at a print that should not exist, the abstract concept of Dogman becomes very concrete very fast. But this man did not turn around. He followed the tracks uphill into the ridge country above him. He pressed deeper. Over the next 2 days, his entries describe a gradual shift in the forest around him. He notes that at certain elevations, the ambient noise drops to almost nothing. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insect hum. Just silence. If you have spent any time in the Pacific Northwest woods, you know that silence like that is not natural. Those forests are loud with layered sound from canopy to floor at all hours. When that sound disappears, something is wrong. Something large enough to suppress the behavior of every other creature in the area is present and close. He also describes a smell that became stronger as he climbed, musky, heavy, sharp in the nostrils, concentrated near rock outcroppings and shallow cave formations along the ridge. The smell lingered in places even when no other sign of activity was visible, which suggests the Dogmen use these formations regularly and have for a long time. On the 5th day, he found scratch marks on trees that he documented in detail. These were not the vertical claw rakes that bears leave when they stretch against trunks. These were horizontal gouges carved into the bark at roughly 6 to 7 feet off the ground, evenly spaced and consistent in depth. He described them as territorial markers, and that interpretation aligns with Dogman behavioral reports I have covered on this channel going back years. The horizontal placement, the height, the deliberate spacing, these are boundary indicators. Something was communicating to any creature that passed through this area that the territory beyond belonged to something that did not want company. Those marks were a fence, a warning sign written in claw gouges at a height that only something standing 7 feet tall could reach. And he walked right past them. Day 7 is the entry that made me stop and reread 3 times before I could continue. He found a kill site, a deer carcass in a shallow depression near a rock shelf, but the carcass was not torn apart the way a predator typically leaves a kill. He used a specific word: disassembled. The bones had been separated at the joints. The hide was folded and set aside. The organs had been removed cleanly, not ripped out, but cut or pulled with precision. He wrote that nothing in those woods does this, that what he was looking at was processing, and that it was done with hands. I want to pause here because this detail separates Dogman reports from standard large predator encounters in a way that most people do not fully appreciate. Bears tear, cougars drag and cache, wolves consume on sight in a frenzy of pack feeding. None of them disassemble prey at the joints. None of them fold hide. None of them remove organs with surgical precision. What this man described is butchering. It is the methodical reduction of a carcass by something that understands anatomy and has the manual dexterity to separate tissue from bone with control and intent. If you have watched my video on the Michigan Dogman den discovery, you will remember that the remains found inside that den showed the exact same pattern: joints separated cleanly, hide set aside, bones cracked for marrow but not shattered randomly. The consistency across these reports, separated by thousands of miles and decades of time, is what convinces me we are looking at a species-level behavior. And I want to point out something else about this kill site that the journal specifically noted. There were no scavengers near the carcass, no crows, no vultures, no flies, even though the remains had been sitting in a damp forest depression where insects should have been swarming. Every scavenger in that ecosystem knew to stay away from that site. They had learned, through whatever instinct or experience guides them, that this kill belonged to something you did not steal from. When the entire food chain adjusts its behavior around a single predator's feeding site, that tells you something about the apex status of whatever made that kill. I personally think this is one of the most underreported aspects of Dogman encounters, and it is something I have been pushing on for a while now on this channel. We spend so much time focused on sightings, on the terrifying moment someone sees one of these creatures standing at the edge of a road or moving through timber at dusk, that we overlook the physical evidence they leave behind. And that evidence consistently points to something with intelligence, with tool use, and with behavioral patterns that go far beyond any known predator in North America. The journal entries from days 8 and 9 are shorter, but more intense. The handwriting, according to those who have seen the pages, becomes tighter and more hurried. He writes about hearing movement around his camp at night, not the random rustling of wildlife passing through, deliberate circling. Something was making passes around his tent at a consistent distance, and he could hear it clearly because the forest was dead silent around him. He describes low vocalizations that came from multiple directions, sounds he recorded as somewhere between a growl and a bark, but deeper, resonating in the chest rather than the throat. He estimated at least 3 distinct sources based on the spacing and timing of the sounds, which suggests he was being circled by multiple dogmen working in coordination. Not one creature pacing, a group maintaining formation, communicating positions to each other in the darkness. He stopped sleeping through the night entirely by day 8. He writes about lying awake in his tent, listening to the footfalls and the vocalizations, waiting for the sound to stop. It always stopped before dawn, and every morning he found evidence that his camp had been visited. Small things at first. His cook pot moved from where he left it, a stuffed sack turned inside out and left draped over a branch. Nothing was eaten, nothing was taken. Things were simply moved to demonstrate that something had been there. Then on the morning of day 9, he found his hiking boots outside the tent, placed neatly side by side on the ground near the entrance. He wrote that he was absolutely certain he had left them inside the tent the night before, tucked against the wall near his pack. Something had opened the tent, removed his boots without waking him, and set them down outside with the kind of deliberate care that suggested not just capability, but intent. I want you to sit with that image for a moment. A dogman reaching into your tent while you sleep, inches from your body, taking your boots, placing them outside as a message. I was here and you never knew. Day 10 contains what I think is the most important sentence in the entire journal. He wrote that he believed they had been watching him since day 2, and that they had let him find the tracks. Let me say that again because the implications are enormous. He did not write that they failed to hide from him. He did not write that his tracking skills were superior or that he outsmarted them. He wrote that they allowed him to approach. The tracks, the kill site, the territorial markers were not mistakes or oversights by the Dogman. They were an invitation, or at the very least, a test. The Dogman knew he was in their territory from the moment he arrived. They chose to let him come closer. They chose to observe him rather than drive him out. And this matches a behavioral pattern that I have seen described in Dogman encounter reports across multiple states and decades. I call it the observation period. Witnesses describe days or sometimes weeks of small signs before a direct encounter. Sounds at night, objects moved, the persistent feeling of being watched from just beyond visibility. The Dogman do not immediately attack trespassers in most documented cases. They study them first. They assess the threat, gauge the behavior, and decide how to respond based on what the intruder does. If the intruder leaves, the signs stop. If the intruder stays, the signs escalate. And in this case, the intruder kept pushing deeper toward the Dogman den. And they let him, right up until the moment they did not. He debated leaving. The journal makes that clear. He wrote about the pull between self-preservation and the need to document what he had found. He knew the camcorder footage could change the conversation about Dogman forever. He knew that physical evidence from a den site would be undeniable, and he decided to push one more day toward the cave formations he had spotted on the ridgeline above him. One more day. That is all he needed. One more day. I have covered enough missing persons cases connected to Dogman activity to recognize this pattern, and it is the part that haunts me the most. There is always a window where the person could leave. There is always a moment where the rational choice is to turn around, hike out, come back with a larger team and better equipment. And almost every time the person does not take it. The pull of discovery overrides the warning signals. The need to prove something overrides the instinct to survive. It happened here, and it cost this man everything. Day 11 is April 24th, 1993, the day the frames were recorded. The journal entry from that morning describes clear weather and good visibility across the ridgeline. He packed the camcorder in a small day bag and hiked toward the cave formations he had been observing from a distance over the previous days. He positioned himself on a grassy slope roughly 100 to 200 yards from the cave mouths, partially concealed behind a rock outcrop, and began recording. What the camera captured is what you have already seen, but I want to walk through it frame by frame because the progression matters, and there are details that become clear only when you study them carefully. The first moments of footage show the hillside and the cave openings. The rock formation is substantial, a natural volcanic outcrop with at least 2 or 3 dark openings that lead into the hillside. Grass covers the slopes around it. The area near the cave mouths appears packed and worn like ground that has been walked over regularly for a very long time. Then a Dogman appears at the mouth of one of the caves. It is standing upright in a relaxed posture, not alert or scanning for threats. It is simply present, existing in its own space the way any creature exists in a place it considers home. The body proportions are clear even in the grainy footage. This is something large, muscular, and built for both bipedal and quadrupedal movement. The head is unmistakably canine with a pronounced muzzle and pointed ears. The shoulders are too broad for any human frame. Then more of them appear. The camera captures 4, possibly 5 Dogmen walking together across the slope near the cave entrances. They are moving as a coordinated group, upright. their gait smooth and purposeful. These are not animals scattering from a disturbance or milling around randomly. These are individuals traveling together with a shared direction and what appears to be a shared purpose. There is a formation to it. The way they space themselves, the way one leads and the others follow at even intervals. This is organized group movement. This is a Dogman patrol or hunting party returning to base. The closer frames reveal details that I think fundamentally change how we need to think about Dogman as a species. The creatures are enormous, easily 7 feet or taller based on the scale of the cave mouths and the surrounding vegetation. Their fur is dark grayish-brown, thick across the shoulders and chest, thinner on the limbs. The heads have elongated muzzles, pointed ears, and eyes that catch light even in early 90s camcorder resolution. But the bodies are humanoid in structure. Broad shoulders, defined musculature in the arms and chest, visible even through the fur. Hands, not paws, at the ends of arms that hang slightly longer than human proportions, but are clearly built for grip and fine manipulation. These Dogmen are constructed for both worlds, the animal strength and the deliberate tool use, the predatory instinct and the organized social behavior. And then there are the coverings. Around the waists of several of the Dogman, you can see what appears to be crude garments, hides or leather wraps secured at the hip. I know how that sounds. I know that claiming Dogman wear clothing is the kind of statement that gets you dismissed instantly by skeptics. But look at the frames yourself. The coverings are there. They are distinct from the natural fur. They are positioned and secured in a way that requires hands and intention to create and to wear. You do not fashion hide into a wrap unless you have the manual dexterity, the planning ability, and the abstract thinking required to take material from a prey animal and repurpose it for your own body. That is not animal behavior. That is the beginning of culture. And at least one of them is carrying what appears to be a staff or spear, held upright, gripped in one hand while walking. A Dogman carrying a tool or weapon while walking bipedally in formation with others of its kind. This is not a sighting report. This is documentation of a Dogman civilization. I have been running this channel for a while now, and I have seen a lot of footage that people claim shows Dogman or other cryptids. Most of it does not convince me, and I try to maintain a high bar for what I present to you because I think this subject deserves serious treatment. But these frames stopped me cold. This is not ambiguous. This is a Dogman tribe documented on camera by a man who gave everything to bring this evidence out of those mountains. And I think we owe it to him to take it seriously. The journal entry from later on day 11, after the footage was captured, is the longest single entry in the entire journal. The handwriting is hurried but legible, the words pressed hard into the page. He had filmed them. He had documented at least 5 Dogman at their den site. He described their size, their coloring, their posture, the hide coverings, and the carried objects in detail. He wrote that they were not animals, that they used tools, that they lived in organized groups, that they had a home. He also noted something critical to understanding what came next. At one point during the recording, one of the Dogmen paused and turned in his direction. It did not charge. It did not vocalize or display aggression. It simply looked toward where he was positioned and held that gaze for several seconds before turning back to the group and continuing toward the caves. He believed he had been seen. He believed the Dogman knew exactly where he was. And yet they did not react with hostility. They allowed him to watch. They allowed him to record. Day 12 has a shorter entry. He writes that the night after filming the Dogman den was the most intense yet. The sounds around his camp were louder, closer, and more sustained than any previous night. He heard heavy footfalls circling within an estimated 30 to 40 feet of his tent. The vocalizations were continuous, overlapping calls from multiple directions that he interpreted as direct communication between several Dogmen discussing his presence. They were not just aware of him, they were deliberating. In the morning he found something new outside his tent. A dead rabbit, freshly killed, placed on a flat rock near his fire ring, not mauled, not half-eaten, placed there whole and intact, positioned with obvious deliberation. I have read about this behavior in folklore traditions from Pacific Northwest indigenous communities. The leaving of a gift or offering outside the camp of a trespasser is documented in multiple oral histories connected to forest beings that these communities have recognized for generations. In some traditions, the gift is an acknowledgement and a peace offering, a way of saying we see you and we are choosing restraint. In others, it is a test with consequences. Take the gift and leave, and you are forgiven the trespass. Take the gift and stay, and you have accepted terms you do not fully understand. The rabbit was a message. I do not know which interpretation this man applied to it, and based on the journal, I do not think he knew either, but he stayed. He took it as confirmation that the Dogman were engaging with him, and he decided to push further. Day 13 is the final entry. It is short, a few lines. The handwriting is steady, which tells me he was not writing in a state of panic. He was calm, resolved. He had made his decision. He wrote that he was going back to the Dogman caves. He believed that if he could get inside the den and record the interior, the footage would be undeniable proof that Dogmen exist as an organized tool-using, socially structured species. He wrote one final line that has stayed with me since I first learned about this case. If I do not come back with this footage, none of it matters. That is the last thing he ever wrote. No sign of struggle in the journal. No desperate final notes scrawled in the margins. No blood on the pages. He closed the journal, left it at his campsite, packed the camcorder, and walked toward the Dogman caves. Somewhere between his tent and those dark openings in the rock, the story of this man's life ends. We do not know what happened inside the den. We do not know what he saw or what the Dogman did when he crossed that final threshold. The camera was found back at the campsite, which raises its own questions. Either he returned to camp at some point and left the camera before going back out again, or something brought the camera back to the tent. And his boots were found 200 yards away, placed neatly, side by side. Not in the direction of the Dogman caves, in the direction of the trail leading out of the mountains, pointing home. I have thought about those boots more than anything else in this case. The placement, the neatness, the direction they faced. And I keep coming back to the same interpretation, the only one that makes sense to me given everything else we know. Something with hands and with intent took those boots and placed them on the path leading away from the territory. It was a message, not written in any language we would recognize, but clear enough if you are willing to hear it. You came. You saw. Now leave. And when he did not leave, when he went back to the Dogman den instead of following the path those boots were pointing toward, whatever tolerance the tribe had extended reached its end. He crossed a line that the Dogman had drawn clearly, repeatedly, over the course of nearly 2 weeks. They moved his gear as a sign of their access. They circled his camp nightly as a display of their numbers. They left an offering as a final gesture. They placed his boots on the exit trail as the clearest possible instruction. Every escalation was a chance to turn back. He used none of them. I want to step back from the journal now and talk about the broader context, because this case does not exist in isolation, and the patterns it reveals connect to something much larger. The Pacific Northwest has one of the highest concentrations of Dogman sighting reports anywhere in North America. The Cascade Range, in particular, has generated consistent accounts going back decades from hunters, hikers, forestry workers, tribal members, and even law enforcement personnel, who generally refuse to file anything official about what they have encountered. The terrain is ideal for a large, intelligent, reclusive species that does not want to be found. Dense, old-growth forest covering thousands of square miles with canopy so thick that satellite imagery reveals nothing of what moves beneath it. Extensive cave systems in volcanic rock that have never been fully surveyed or mapped. Abundant prey populations including deer, elk, and smaller game. And vast stretches of federally designated wilderness that see almost zero human traffic outside of a few maintained trails during summer months. If you were designing a habitat for something that wanted to remain hidden from modern human civilization while maintaining a thriving population, you would design something very close to the Cascade backcountry. The resources are there, the shelter is there, the isolation is there. And the Dogman, based on everything I have researched, have been using those advantages for a very long time. Indigenous communities in the region have oral traditions that describe beings matching the Dogman profile going back centuries. The specific details vary between nations, but the core description is remarkably consistent across groups that had little or no contact with each other. Tall, wolf-headed, bipedal, territorial, intelligent, dangerous when provoked, but not indiscriminately aggressive toward humans who respect the boundaries. Several traditions specifically warn against entering certain areas where these beings are said to dwell. One tradition I came across during my research describes cave-dwelling guardians in the high volcanic country who walk on two legs like men but have the faces and teeth of wolves. The elders taught that these beings were protectors of the deep places, the caves and springs and old-growth stands that humans were not meant to enter. They could be appeased with offerings left at the boundaries of their territory. They could be provoked by trespassing beyond the marked lines. And they communicated their displeasure through a specific escalation pattern. First, sounds in the night, then signs that they had been close to your camp, then a gift left at your door as a final warning. If you ignored all three, you would not be warned again. When I read that and compared it to the journal entries from this case, the hair on my arms stood up. The progression described in centuries-old oral tradition matches the journal almost step for step. The nighttime circling on days 8 and 9. The moved gear and the boots placed outside the tent. The rabbit left as an offering on day 12. These were not random events, they were a protocol. A Dogman protocol for dealing with trespassers that has apparently been consistent for hundreds of years. These oral traditions are not campfire stories designed to scare children. They are practical survival instructions passed down through generations by people who share the landscape with these creatures and who have learned, often through terrible loss, exactly where the lines are drawn. The fact that a man in 1993 walked directly into one of these warned against territories and experienced exactly what the traditions describe should stop us in our tracks. The indigenous peoples were not exaggerating. They were documenting what they knew from generations of direct experience with the Dogman. The missing persons pattern in the Pacific Northwest is something I have been researching for years, and the data points bother me. There are clusters, specific geographic areas where disappearances occur at a rate that does not match the expected baseline for wilderness accidents, exposure deaths, or animal attacks. Many of these clusters overlap with reported Dogman activity zones. Many overlap with areas that indigenous communities have historically marked as forbidden. Many of the missing are experienced outdoorsmen who should not have simply vanished. Solo travelers who ventured off established trails into remote backcountry and never came out. In some cases, gear is recovered, but the person is not. In a handful of those cases, the recovered gear shows signs of the same deliberate arrangement we see in this journal. Objects placed rather than scattered. Equipment organized rather than destroyed. Boots set neatly instead of torn apart by predators. I am not claiming that every missing hiker in the Pacific Northwest was taken by Dogman. Many of these cases have mundane explanations, and I want to be responsible about how I frame this. Falls, exposure, medical events, getting turned around in dense old-growth timber, where visibility drops to 20 feet. These things happen. But the cases that do not fit those explanations, where the evidence points to something with intelligence and intention rather than accident or animal predation, those cases deserve far more scrutiny than they have received. And what disturbs me most about the pattern is the silence around it. The cases get filed. The reports get closed. Nobody connects the dots between a missing hiker in the Oregon Cascades and a missing hunter 50 miles north the following year. Nobody maps the disappearances against the Dogman sighting reports. Nobody asks why the search dogs consistently lose the trail at the same elevation bands where the silence zones and territorial markings begin. The data is there. The connections are there. But nobody in an official capacity is willing to draw the lines between the points because the picture those lines create is one that no government agency wants to acknowledge publicly. Now, I want to address what I think is the most important takeaway from this entire case, and it connects directly to those 4 frames from 1993. If Dogmen live in tribal structures, if they have permanent dens, tools, clothing, coordinated group behavior, and the intelligence to study a human intruder for 2 weeks before deciding how to respond, then we are not dealing with an animal in any conventional sense. We are dealing with a species, a civilization, primitive by our standards but organized, intentional, and capable of complex decisions. I have spent years on this channel talking about individual Dogman encounters, one creature, one witness, one terrifying night in the woods, and those accounts are valuable, and I believe them. But the evidence is building, case by case, that Dogmen do not live as solitary predators roaming aimlessly through forests. They live in groups. They have social structures and hierarchies. They have territory they maintain and defend through coordinated behavioral patterns that suggest planning and communication. They process food with tools. They wear coverings fashioned from animal hide. They carry implements that serve as weapons or functional objects. And if the reports I have been collecting over several years are accurate, they communicate with each other using structured vocalizations that suggest language or something very close to it, not random animal calls. Responsive, coordinated exchanges between individuals who are organizing actions together. That is not animal behavior by any definition we currently use. That is a people we do not understand, cannot communicate with, and have been sharing this continent with for far longer than mainstream science is willing to entertain as a possibility. The indigenous communities knew. They have always known. We are the ones who refuse to listen. I personally think this footage is some of the most significant Dogman evidence in existence. Not because it is the highest resolution or the most dramatic encounter captured on film, but because it shows something we almost never get to see. Dogman at home, not hunting, not fleeing, not reacting to a sudden human encounter on a back road, just living, walking together in the afternoon light, entering their dwelling, going about the routine of existing as a social species in their own territory. That normalcy is what makes it so deeply unsettling, because it means Dogmen are not rare, one-off anomalies. They are not genetic accidents or misidentified bears having a strange day. They are an established presence with permanent homes, social bonds, tool use, and daily patterns that have been maintained across generations. They have been here all along, in the spaces between our trails and roads and towns, living parallel lives in territories they have held longer than any of us have been alive. And here is the part that really gets me when I think about this case at 2 a.m. If one man with a camcorder stumbled onto a Dogman tribe of 5 or more individuals living in a cave system in 1993, how many other tribes are out there right now, in the thousands of square miles of wilderness that no human has set foot in for decades? The Cascades alone have more unmapped cave systems than anyone has been able to count. The Olympic Peninsula is even more remote. The deep interior of British Columbia and Alaska make the Oregon backcountry look like a city park by comparison. We are not looking at an isolated population of a few stray Dogmen living on the margins. The tribal structure, the tool use, the organized behavior all suggest a breeding population with established territories and generational continuity. These Dogman tribes have been raising young, passing down behaviors, maintaining dens, and defending boundaries for a very long time. And the only reason we do not know more about them is that they have decided we should not. They control the information. They choose who sees them and who does not. And the people who push past the boundaries they set, the ones who go looking for proof, tend not to come back to share what they found. Let me bring this back to the man who held that camera on April 24th, 1993. He went into those mountains alone, driven by a conviction that most people around him would have called delusion. He was looking for something that the scientific establishment says does not exist, that law enforcement refuses to investigate, and that the culture at large treats as a joke to be dismissed over drinks. He found it. He found a Dogman tribe living in their den, and he documented them on film. The evidence he left behind tells a complete story. The journal traces a 2-week arc from discovery to obsession to a final decision that he could not take back. The The camcorder footage captures a moment that was never meant for human eyes. And the carefully placed boots on a trail leading out of the mountains tell us that the Dogman tried, in their own way, to give him a chance to walk away. I think about his final journal entry more often than I probably should. If I do not come back with this footage, none of it matters. He believed that the only thing standing between the world and the truth about Dogman was proof that could not be denied or explained away. He was willing to risk his life for that proof, and the footage survived even if he did not. The question that keeps me up at night is why the Dogman let the cameras survive. They had unrestricted access to his camp. They were in and out every night for a week. They could have taken the camcorder into the caves where it would never have been found. They could have smashed it against a rock. They did not. They left it. They left it the same way they left the boots, pointing toward the way out. And I believe the reason is simple. They wanted it found, not as proof of their existence, because the Dogman do not care whether humans believe in them, but as a warning, a message carried out of their territory by the only means available. You are welcome to look. You are welcome to know we are here, but you are not welcome to enter. And if you cross that line, the Dogman will not give you another chance to leave. I want to hear from you on this one. Have you ever been in a forest that went completely unnaturally silent? Have you found something in the woods that was arranged too deliberately to be natural? Have you ever heard sounds at night in the backcountry that did not match any animal you know? Drop it in the comments. Tell me your location. I am building a map of Dogman encounter zones across North America, and every report adds another data point to a picture that is getting clearer with every video I produce. If you are new here, subscribe and hit the bell because I cover cases like this regularly. The next one I am working on connects some dots between this Dogman tribe footage and other group sightings that have been coming in from the Pacific Northwest and beyond. You are going to want to see it. Stay safe out there. And if the forest goes quiet around you, trust that instinct in your gut. Turn around. Take the path the boots were pointing toward, and do not go back.